I have been screencasting videos since 2001, exclusively using Camtasia to do this work. During that time, I have created, edited, and produced well over 30,000 screencasted videos. As time went on, I adopted my own set of screencasting best practices, which I've used with great success to reliably create these screencasted videos with a minimum of time and effort. The video that follows is a collection of many of these best practices. I'll point out that these are now legacy best practices because they discuss working in Camtasia before the advent of its newer enhancements, such as template projects and Camtasia Rev, improvements which can materially reduce the screencasting workload for new and/or low-experienced users. Although these are legacy best practices, they are still applicable for use when screencasting with the current version of Camtasia. These best practice videos were originally presented as 35 separate tutorials, front-ended by a separate button-style Smart Player menu production. However, Smart Player productions and their interactivities do not function on YouTube, so these 35 videos have been assembled into this single MP4 production for hosting on YouTube. The various subject matters are identified by callouts in the upper right corner, making it possible to scrub the video to quickly locate and view a subject of interest. This collection of tutorials presents my personal preferences when doing screencasting using Camtasia. As a general rule, I configure Recorder to capture almost the full screen, but not the entire full screen. The reason I do that is I do not want the taskbar to be displayed. Accordingly, I'm working on a 1920 by 1080 monitor, so my capture area is set to 1920 by 1040. I've also locked aspect ratio. In this example, we will not be capturing webcam, and I always double check to make sure the right microphone is enabled. I configure Recorder accordingly. I'll open up Tools, Options, make sure that on the General tab, I've specified the path in this location where I want to save all the captures. In order to do that, you have to enable either this option or this option, because with this one enabled, this is not available. So I'll enable automatic file name, and I'll open the file picker and I'll pick a destination folder. I'm already there, so I'll cancel. And this is the path that we'll be saving the captures to. Recorder 2020 can automatically name capture files. We'll go to Tools, Options, File Options. The default setup for this function is to use automatic file name using this naming schema. You can change the naming schema if you'd like. I like to do the following. I call it Recorder 2020 to designate that it's coming out of Camtasia Recorder 2020 dash, and then I'll type in on dash, and instead of MM for month, I'll go right before the bracket 20 to put the year 20, and this MM I'll change to YY, which gives me the year designation. So this 20YY will give me 2020, meaning that the capture was made on the year 2020. I'll move down, instead of DD for date, I'll use MM for month. And then YY would have been the original year. I'm going to change this to DD for day. Then I go down, do another dash, at, dash. Then I'll use a left bracket. And then I'll put HH for hours, and this will be 24-hour days. Right bracket, dash, left bracket, small m, which stands for the minute, right bracket. And so my string for naming a capture will be Recorder 2020, telling me it comes out of Recorder 2020, on the current year, 2020 it'll be, then the month, the day, at HH for the 24-hour in the day, and then MM for the minutes. And then I like to go up here, and instead of using always an automatic file name, I'll ask for a file name. I still get this option, but it'll present this naming schema and give me the option to type over a different name. I'll say OK. Okay, we'll see how this works in real life. We'll start a capture. And my recorder starts pause, so I'm going to resume. And I'm doing just a short test capture here. When I'm finished, I'll hit F10. And notice here the naming schema. We have a record 2020 on the year, the month, the day, at the hour, 8 o'clock in the morning, 31 for the minutes. It was just about 8:30. So that's how that works. I'm going to go ahead and cancel this. I don't need to save this capture. And I'll say yes here. And we're back to the Recorder UI. Also on the Program tab, I've made a couple of settings that are appropriate for the way I like to work. One is I do not record the screen after starting capture. That means the recorder will start in pause mode. Also, I do not restore the cursor, and I always hide the preview screen after the recording is stopped. I don't like to use the one that pops up before you save a capture. Note the do this with my recording option under the workflow group. If you open this drop down, you have some options. The auto option, which is the program default setting, will, on the first capture of a series, automatically put the new capture in the media bin, and it will put it on the timeline in a new project. If you use the save option, it will do exactly what it says. It will just save your capture to your designated location. If you use the produce option at the completion of the capture, that particular capture will go directly to the production wizard. If you use the last option, add the media bin, it will put the finished capture in the media bin, but it will not put it on the timeline. If you use the auto, produce, or add to options, Recorder itself will close automatically after each capture, and you'll have to relaunch Recorder to do another capture. However, if you use the save option, after you save the capture, Recorder will stay open, and you can immediately move on to the next capture. Finally, under minimize here, I have Recorder set to be minimized if it will be recorded in the capture screen area. And I also have it set to minimize to the system tray as opposed to the taskbar. I do that because when you start a capture, this will just disappear. But if you have it set to go to the taskbar, you will see Recorder's UI actually minimizing to the taskbar and coming back out. That doesn't look good. It also requires extra editing to cut those sections out. That completes the setup I need for Recorder, so I'll click OK, and we're ready to proceed with our captures. The golden rule of screencasting is to capture, edit, and produce your videos all using the same dimensions or project settings. If you follow this protocol, editor performance will be optimized and you'll end up with better looking productions with faster rendering times. I'm going to go ahead and close the open instance of Recorder, and I'm going to navigate to another application. This is a small database that I use to record activities, and we're going to be doing a little screencasting of using this particular software tool. Back in Camtasia, I can start my first capture by clicking the record button. Because this instance is open and we're in a new project, the first capture will go into the media bin and on the timeline. So let me start by clicking record. That opened up Recorder. I'm ready to go. I'm going to use shortcut F9 to start. It starts pause, and I will continue by using F9 again. If I want to log a new activity for today, I will click the New Activity command button. I'll tab over. I'll pick the type of activity. In this example, it'll be a support activity. I'll tab again, and this is going to be Camtasia how-to videos. That's the subject area I want to keep track of the time under. So I'll click that, and down here I'll type in what I'm doing, and I'm going to say made screencast for new tutorial. Tab out of that. And if I was done doing this, I would tab all the way over to the number value column and enter a number which would represent the time in hours. But I'm just going to leave this open for the time being because I'm just starting this work. I almost always narrate while do my capturing. I do this because it saves me a lot of time. I don't have to pre-develop a script. And if I make a mistake, I can just fill a capture away, or I could say take two and do it over again. Furthermore, if I do want to come around and do what I call voiceover work, I have the original narration to use as a guide. I can also do speech to text and use the resulting captions as a script to read while I re-narrate using voice narration. And now I'm going to end that capture with F9. I'm going to stop it, which will save it. And I'm going to call this capture number 1 in the series. Enter key. And note that that new capture, which is a Trek file, went in the media bin, and that clip also was placed on the timeline. Now while it's on the timeline here, I'm going to raise the first track. I'm also going to go to the library. Well, I have an asset I call cursor effects. This is just a little clip segment where I've saved the cursor effects that I prefer to use. So with that clip selected, I'll go up here and I will copy effects. This is currently still selected, so I'll delete it. Select and right-click the new capture, paste effects, and again, while the clip is still selected, go up here to the cursor. Note how those effects were already applied now. And I want to scale it up to full size. Gives me a nice big cursor, which I find easier to follow on the screen. What I want to do next is do my next capture in that series. And if I click record again, it opens up Recorder and takes me back to the open instance of the application we were working in. I want to do another capture, so I'm going to continue by starting Recorder in pause mode with the F9 hotkey, and I'll use F9 again to start the actual capture. Let's assume now that I'm at the end of capturing what I needed to for the new tutorial, and I'm ready to go back and enter a value for the time here. So I'll tab over, and let's assume I spent 2 hours and 30 minutes or 2.5 hours, and I'll save that with Shift Enter. And that will complete the work for this little tutorial. And I'll stop the capture with the F9 shortcut and save it with the stop key. And this will be number 2 in the series. Enter key. At this point, I'll assume that I only needed those 2 captures, 1 and 2, for this particular screencast. What I want to do now is put number 2 on the timeline. So I could select and drag it down, just drop it here and let go. And then I will use Control-Shift-7 to zoom the timeline. I'll right-click on the first clip, which had my effects already applied. I'll copy them again, select the new clip, right-click, paste effects, and again with that selected, I'll go up here to the cursor, make sure it's there, and scale him up. So now if I was to scrub the timeline, I'll see that all my cursors are large and my effects have been applied wherever I go. If you intend to auto-generate keystroke callouts for your project, you'll want to do so immediately after finishing your captures and assembling them on the timeline. We'll switch to a different example to demonstrate how to do so. The clip that's on the timeline is a Trek capture that has a fair amount of keystroke activity embedded in it. At this point, there have been no edits accomplished against this clip. When using the auto-generated keystroke function, it is a best practice to add the keystrokes before any edits take place. That way, if you make any timeline cuts, you won't be cutting out any keystrokes that you want to represent in the project. To proceed, go to Modify, Generate Keystroke Callouts. If you want to show everything that happened, click Show All. That'll give you a much longer list of keystrokes. Then toggle the keystroke item here. That selects all of them. Go through the list and look for any instances of F9. They usually represent places where you use F9 to activate recorder. If you miss them here, and I'm deselecting them so they won't show or be generated, if you do miss them here, they'll show up in the project. And of course, you can delete them later in the project. I think that one's gone. That one's gone. Oh, there's one I missed. Also, make sure that display keystrokes on background is checked. In my opinion, that provides a better looking callout. When ready to proceed, click Generate. The keystroke callouts are entered onto the timeline. If you hover the mouse over one of the callouts, you'll find that it went onto the timeline at 5 seconds duration. This seems to be hardwired into Camtasia. You can't change it anywhere that I can find. Even if you change the timings in your preferences, they'll still go on at 5 seconds. That's too long, in my opinion. I prefer a much shorter duration. It makes the call-out appearance in the video more natural because it comes and goes fairly rapidly. To fix that, you can go up to Modify, Duration, and change the duration. I usually use 0.7 seconds. So 0.7. Okay, now they appear to be a more reasonable duration time-wise. Before making any timeline cuts or other edits, you'll want to play through the project entirely and make sure that any instance of a keyboard callout you want to see is represented. So you'll need to play through the entire project. And by example, I'll start here. Normally you should start at t = 0, but I'll start here and play. I'm turning the speaker off so we don't listen to this stuff. Normally you'd have the speaker on because it's my practice when narrating a tutorial that if I use a keyboard shortcut, I'll announce what I'm doing, like
Control Home, Spacebar, etc. Let's zoom in a little bit here and put the playhead back over the first call out. Note the location and size. They're all still selected. I will typically grab them in the center and move them somewhere else, because usually dead center will cover up some of the screen action. And I may also, with them all selected, resize all of them at the same time. That's a lot quicker than doing it one at a time. Having done that, I'm going to deselect them all, and I'll reselect one of the callouts. In this case, it's a representation of the delete key. I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, Control C. The reason I do that is as I play along here, if I find any more instances of keystrokes that didn't get auto-generated, I could use Control V to paste this callout in place. I do that because if you use the keystrokes available through annotations, and that's these guys here, none of these options will give you the same background that you see here. Again, I find this background easier on the eyes. I'll point out that we shortened the duration from 5 seconds to 0.7 seconds. That makes it easier to preview the project. And if you do copy this to your clipboard and you add one back in manually that didn't get auto-generated, it'll go on at the proper duration. After previewing the entire project, and let me zoom out, Control-Shift-7, you can go ahead then and proceed with your normal editing, cutting out narration, etc. Because the keystroke callouts are already in place, there's a lot lower chance that you're going to delete one that you want, because you'll be able to see it as you edit. We'll switch back to our original example and discuss cutting out gaps in narration. The first thing I usually do in editing is to edit out bad spaces in the narration. I'll make this a little larger, and then I'll zoom in the timeline a little bit. I'm using the Control scroll wheel. And then I will check the time between the first narration, and here it's like almost 1.5 seconds. So I'm going to cut that back to about half. Control X will delete that and also shift everything back to the left. Next, I'll just start the timeline playing, and I'll do that using this button. If I want to, I've turned the speakers off, but what I'm going to do is listen for dead space. There's some here, obviously. I'll usually listen through it, pause, then I'll go back, make a selection that I want to get rid of, and once again, use Control X, which is the same as the cut button here, but I like to use Control X, and that cuts that space out. It's shifted everything to the right, back to the left. If I move this, I also got an automatic stitch. That's a configuration that's set up when you go to Edit, Preferences. Enable auto stitching is usually on by default. I like to leave it there. And if you want to get rid of a stitch you don't want, you can right click and unstitch. You can also restitch, but the restitching or stitching will only work within the same clip capture. So I will continue editing by playing the timeline. I did that with the space bar until I find my next section, and I'm listening to this, make sure there's no goofs. And if there is, I'll cut them out, but I want to get rid of this extra space here. Control X, and so on. One thing I do is when I'm listening across, and if I run into a section where I'm actually typing, I'll usually cut that out. Let me play this section. My speaker's back on again. And I'm going to say, made screencast. Okay, there's a lot of typing here, no narration, and there's no good reason to use all that time to type. So I'll usually select the typing section without narration and cut that out also. One thing you should do very early on in editing, and I forgot to mention this, is save the project. This is currently still an unsaved project, so I'll use the shortcut to save, Control S, and I'm going to call this Test Project. Enter key. You want to do that deliberately, but if we go back to Edit, Preferences, we can see that Enable Autosave is enabled, and it's going to happen every 2 minutes. So if you edit for more than 2 minutes, you'll get an autosave instance of this project, as long as it's been edited and not yet saved. Another thing I do during this initial editing section is to cut out goofs made during narration. Now, when I narrate and I make a goof, I often do not stop recorder. I will just say something wrong. I'll realize that. I'll say take 2, and I'll repeat what I just did and what I just said. And then as I'm listening through here, if I hear any of those sections, I'll select them and cut them out. Again, let's listen across the section here. Number value column and enter a time, which would take 2. And enter a number, which would take 3. And enter a number, which would represent the time in hours. Okay, it looks like the bad part started here, so we'll go take 3. And right past the take 3 statement. And I'll drag this back. And I'm going to listen to this section so I get the right context, so I can adjust the selection and cut out only what is really bad. So let me play this. Number value column and enter a time, which would take 2. And enter a number, which would take 3. So it sounds like and enter a number. But just to be sure, let's drag this out a little bit. Bring him back. Take 3. And enter a number. Yep, and enter a number is the right one. So back here, I had number value column and enter a time, which would... There's the mistake. So it's... And enter a time is the beginning of the bad section. And here I wanted to go to the end of take 3, which I'm pretty sure here. I'll play it one more time. Enter a time, which would take 2. And enter a number, which would take 3. All right, that's it. Control X. And now let's play the section. Number value column and enter a number, which would represent the time in hours. But I'm just... Okay, that sounds pretty good. And note that I've made the edits. And let's go to the autosave folder and see if there's any file there. So to do that, we'll go to Edit, Preferences, Open Autosave Folder. And there's nothing there yet because 2 minutes hasn't transpired. I'm not going to save this edit. We're going to leave it open. And we'll come back in a little bit and see if a value gets placed there automatically. Okay, let's check that again. Edit, Preferences, open the autosave. Bingo, there it is there. So in that period of time I was just paused, autosave detected that we made edits that hadn't been manually saved, and it created a backup copy of the current project. And the next time you do a manual save, the auto-saved project file will be deleted. So I can close this folder, and I'm done with this. After having edited the timeline to correct narration issues, I'll next enter appropriate callouts. I've positioned the playhead where I want to enter a callout. So I'll go to Annotations, and I'm going to select, for this example, the bold collection, and then I'll right-click, add to timeline this particular callout. And I will change the text by double-clicking on the text, and I'll just type add details. And I might spread that out, bring it down, and position him here because I'm going to be demonstrating adding details right here. And let's see how long I want that to last. Let's go. I'll play the timeline. And down here, I'll type in what I'm doing. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to stretch it out to here. And I think to make it look better, I'm going to put a transition at the beginning of the end. So with the call out selected, I'll use the Shift T key. That adds the last type of transition I used. And now if I play across there, that, and down here I'll type in what I'm doing, and I'm going to say, okay, that worked. If I want to do any zoom pans, I'll enter those at this point. And in some instances, I may want to do zoom pans where the zoom pan will include the call out I just added. If I don't want call outs to be affected by any zooming or panning, I want to add those later on. Otherwise, I'll have to remove the zoom pan from the call out after I do the zooming. Let's, with the playhead here, go to animations. And I want to do a zoom to go close to the details section I was just talking about. So we'll do that. And I think my default zoom is 1 second. Let's suppose I want to make him last a little longer, so we'll go up to about 2 seconds. Now if I play across, so I'll click that, and down here I'll type in what I'm doing. All right, that worked out good because I wanted the add details call out to display after the zoom. I'm going to say, if I want to restore the normal view, I'll just go up here and click Scale to Fit. And if I play across that, tab out of that. And if I was done doing this, I would... All right, that's looking good. If appropriate, I might also add some transitions. For example, at this point in the screencast, I'm going to want to use a fade through black transition. Let's play across here. Time being, because I'm just starting this work. And I'm ready. Okay, I want, at this juncture between these two clips, I want to use a fade through black to represent a passage of time. So I'm going to drag one down and dropping. At this point, I'm going to want to add a call out here that references add value for time in hours. So once again, we'll go to annotations. I'm going to select my favorite call out, right click, add to timeline, double click the text. I'm going to say add number for time in hours. That'll work. And let me just pull him out a little bit, make him a little bigger. And I'll drag it over here. And I'm going to assume, for purposes of this section, that I need to zoom and not show this thing here. So let's play across here. And I'm ready to go back and enter a value for the time here. So I'll tab over. So what I'm going to do is pick my zoom point. And I'm ready to go back and enter a... This will be fine. If I go back to animations, I'm going to zoom again. Notice this time that the call out is zoomed itself. And to adjust the time of these, I've got to select both of them, because note that the zoom pan animation point that was applied to the clip was also applied to the call out. So I need to have them both selected. Then I can drag them both out to around 2 seconds. Now let's play that one more time. This work. And I'm ready to go back and enter a value for the time here. So I'll tab over. And let's assume I spent 2 hours and 30 minutes or 2.5 hours. And I'll save that with Shift Enter. All right, I'm going to drag this guy all the way out. I think he'll look better to be seen at the very end. With Shift Enter. And then, once again, I'm going to go back and scale to fit. And notice we get zoom points on both clips. I find it helps to add the appropriate keystroke callout to tutorials where keyboard shortcuts have been used to navigate around the screen. I prefer to add all the keystroke callouts on their own track. So typically, after I've added my zoom pans and any call outs, I will lock the top track, and that will force any new call outs, which are keystroke call outs, to go on to the new track. To optimize the workflow, I try to add all the keystroke call outs manually and in the same work session. Typically, I'll start off by playing the timeline, listening for where a keystroke call out would be appropriate. I'll play now. If I want to log a new activity for today, I will click the New Activity command button. I'll tab over. Okay, there we started calling out tab actions on the keyboard. I'll zoom in the timeline. Now I'm using the control scroll wheel. Shift around, and I'll replay the section until I find the exact location where the keyboard shortcut was used. So let's play through again. New Activity command button. I'll tab over. Okay, by watching the canvas and listening, I can see that this is the location where the tab key was used. I'll go back about a half a second. I like to add my keystroke callouts with a duration of 1 second. So I want to go to Edit, Preferences, Timing, and make sure that my annotations are at 1 second. And here we're okay. Click OK. Then I'll go to Annotations, Keyboard. So I usually use this one. Right click, add it to the timeline. Note that it went on at 1 second duration, and it basically straddles where the action took place. I prefer to have it exactly in the middle. After I've repositioned it, I'll give the correct value, in this case the tab key, and I'll do that by using the tab key. Take the focus away, and then I'll play through again. I'll tab over. That way I did it twice, so I'm going to have to drag him out a little bit to show that it worked twice. And I'm going to leave him in the center at the default size for the time being, because when I'm finished with this, I will typically select all the keyboard callouts at the same time, reposition and resize them to make them show up better in the tutorial. Now, it is possible to have the Camtasia editor enter the keystroke callouts automatically. However, sometimes keyboard shortcuts are missed by the application, and they don't always go on the timeline in the right duration or the right location. So I get much better results and save time if I just stick them in manually. I'll continue playing the timeline until I locate the next instance where I want to add a keystroke callout. And I'll start to play. Tab over. I'll pick the type of activity. In this example, it'll be a support activity. I'll tab again. And all right, back here we had I'll tab another tab action. I'll back off till that's where it took place. I want to have it straddle. So once again, I'll back up, right click, add it. Select it up here, use the tab key, take off the focus, and I'll go on to the next instance. I'll tab again, and this is going, and so forth. I'm currently putting the playhead over top the last keystroke call out in the project. Note that it says Shift plus Enter. You can't do that in Camtasia. If you use Shift Enter on the keyboard, you actually get Shift plus Return. I don't care for that because there's no return on the keyboard. However, I have created some custom keystroke callouts, and I keep them in the library. I have one for Enter and one for Alt-Tab, which you also can't do. So what I did down here on this final callout, and let me zoom in a little bit, is I grouped both Shift Return and the Enter callout, and I shifted the Enter so it covered the return. And that gives me the combination I'm looking for. Now, after all the manual keystroke callouts have been entered, I'll go back, right click, select all the callouts on the track, and that's the media, and then I will resize them as appropriate. I like them a little bigger, and then I'll usually shift them down somewhere where they don't block the main view. In this case, I think I'll put them over here because I don't think we're working on that part of the UI. But after you reposition them, or you can reposition them manually, each one, I'll go back and scrub the timeline, Control Home, just to make sure that they're not blocking anything that's real critical. My action is not where they are. That's good. And that's good. Okay, that'll work. No problem. Control Home. At this point in the project build-out, I will usually add in my interactive content. That is to say, I would add in any markers, captions, hotspots, or quizzes. I will add that if you're going to be adding captions and you'll be using speech to text, and if the original audio is not up to snuff, I would clean up the existing audio before adding the captions. The reason for cleaning up audio at this point is that speech to text will work better with a clean audio file. You can sometimes clean up the quality of the audio using Audio Effects noise removal, but I don't have very good luck with that, particularly if there are more than one track file on the timeline. My preferred technique would be to go to Share, Export Audio Only. That will create a single WAV file for the entire project. I'll then import that into free Audacity, use Audacity's noise removal to clean it up. I'll export that clean file out of Audacity and I'll import it back into Camtasia. Then I'll select everything on the timeline. I'll go up to audio and I'll reduce the gain to 0 on everything. Then I'll put the new WAV file from Audacity on the timeline and I'll use that for my audio. Once you have a project with cleaned up audio, you can then proceed to do your captions using speech to text. Once you have your captions in place, if you need to do voiceover to replace the original narration, you can use the captions as a script while you re-narrate each section. At this point, I've added a couple of markers. Markers go on the timeline initially as global or timeline markers. However, if you make any cuts or move things around the timeline, those markers can shift. To preclude that, you want to convert the markers to media markers, and that's easy to do. Navigate to a marker, go down with the marker line open, and click below the marker on a piece of media. Here I'm using the screen capture here, and that will convert the global marker to a media marker. Now if you move the media around, the marker will move with it. I'll do the same thing for the rest of these and the last one. By the way, if you add a quiz to your screencast, you'll want to do the same thing with the quiz. When you first put a quiz on the timeline, it's a timeline quiz. And again, moving media around will displace the location of the quiz. So you can make the quiz a media quiz by doing the same thing we just did with the markers. The audio in this screencast is currently in pretty good shape, so I'm going to use it as is and use speech to text to create captions. And to do so, I'll have to go to the More Captions item. I'll click on Tools item, Speech to Text. And it just transcribed the entire project. After editing the speech to text captions if necessary, I can navigate to one of the captions and then I could use it as a script if I want to re-narrate that section. To do so, I'll go to voice narration and I'll silence the original audio, which in this case is on the screen captures here. So I'll disable that for a minute. And now I just want to re-narrate this section, and I'll do it so that it times out the length of the current caption. To do so, back again at voice narration, I'll start it and read and end it. If I want to log a new activity for the day, I will click the New Activity command button. I'll use the default name, save. And now I have a new narration that I can use to replace the one down here. And I can replace the one down here by unlocking, using splits to isolate this section, and then silencing the original audio. After all the editing is completed, I like to preview the entire project for quality control purposes. I'll usually do this with the canvas in full screen mode. That way I can view the project like it would look in a video that's full screened in a browser. To do this, I'll go up to Detach Canvas. I'll full screen it. To go back to the project view from full screen, I'll use Alt-Tab. In the project view, I can minimize the canvas area. There's nothing to see. And that'll give me more room for more tracks. I can also minimize the height of all the tracks. And if I do that, I might have room for almost a dozen tracks. To preview the project, I'll Alt-Tab back to full screen mode, and I'll use the space bar to start play. If I want to log a new I've turned off the speaker, and I'll play looking for any errors. If I see any, I'll stop play with the space bar, Alt-Tab back to the project, and I'll make the correction. The playhead will be at the right location in the project where I noted the error or close to it. If I have to, I can reattach the canvas and hunt and peck to find the exact location. Now I'm using Alt-Tab to go back and forth between the project view and the canvas view because I don't have a dual monitor system. If I had a dual monitor system, I could configure one monitor to show the project, the other the full screen canvas. When I'm finished doing the audit, I go back and reattach the canvas and resize the UI. This project has 101 tracks. If you would like to work with more tracks than you can see by minimizing the size of the canvas, you can detach the timeline. To do that, we're going to use Control and the number 3 together. After the process completes, you'll have a window that's just the timeline. You can maximize it, and here you'll be able to see a lot more tracks. In this case, I think there are at least 15 in sight, and of course scrolling them is a lot easier here than it is on the smaller size display. When you're finished working with a detached timeline, use Control 3 a second time, and that will reattach the timeline to the main editor user interface. When the timeline is detached, you can use Alt-Tab to cycle between the Camtasia windows. After completing the project build-out, I'll move on and produce the project. To do so, I'll use the shortcut Control-P to open the production wizard. I always prefer to do custom productions. My basic version is MP4 with Smart Player, and I may or may not want to use any of the settings you see here. You can pick them as appropriate. Under video settings, I find that it's important to increase the default quality settings. I use 70% instead of 60%, and I use H.264 at high. If there are interactive objects in the project, I'll also set keyframe to every 1 second. That gives better time performance of things like hotspots. On the Options tab, you can make the appropriate settings. move on, I use a custom watermark. You can set it up using the options button here. And then under the table of contents, and we're going to get one because we have markers, I like to number mine. I like to make the table of contents initially visible. And I'll point out, if you did not have a marker at t equals 0, which we did in this case, the first marker you see here would say introduction instead of the value shown here. I prefer to have text only table of contents, but you can choose whatever you like. While we're on the subject of the TOC, I'll point out that you can actually enter text with a longer value here than you can in the project. You can simply select an item, click rename, and type away. You'll end up with multiple lines of text in your TOC, but you can sometimes use that to make a more meaningful TOC item. On the next screen, I always make sure that my productions go into a subfolder, and I like to be able to see production results because that allows me to open the production subfolder. I'll also point out that I do not use play video after production, and that's because I'm usually doing something else with the computer while the production is in process. If I was doing something else when the production ends, and if this was checked off, it would kick me into the video and would mess up my workflow. After you've made a successful production, a best practice is to always export the project as a zip if you ever expect to want to be able to use it again. To do so, I use the shortcuts Alt-F-E, opens the export dialog. I'll click the file picker to navigate to the location I want to use to store the zip file. Note that the default name for the zip file is the same as the project. Now, my personal preference here is to always put my zip archives in the same subfolder that the production went into. So I'll navigate to that subfolder, and I'll stick my zip file there. You can choose to include or not include unused files in the media bin. I don't need things I didn't use, so I have it unchecked. I'll just click OK. And the project is zipped. Once the project is zipped, it's safe to delete any of your original captures or other project files that were used in the project. The reason is they're now contained within the same zip file. I have Recorder open. I'm going to make a test capture of the editor UI. Before I do that, let's go to Tools, Options, and we'll go to Shortcuts, and I'm going to point out that the shortcut for adding a marker in Recorder is normally M. I have set it to Control-Shift-M. That minimizes confusion in the products when you're using Recorder to capture the editor. I just point that out. Normally you can leave M alone if you don't capture Camtasia, but I do it all the time, so I've changed it to Control-Shift-M. What I'm going to do now is start a capture, and I'll resume. This is a short test capture. I'm going to use it to demonstrate adding markers to a capture. So I'm going to use Control-Shift-M as the first marker, Control-Shift-M as the second, and Control-Shift-M as the third. I've loaded that test capture in a new project. I did add these keyboard callouts for clarification. Notice that the markers were added without any titles on the marker, and they were also added as media markers. Now, if we go to Modify, Markers, we have some options. We can add more markers, we can split at all markers, and we can remove all markers. Let's execute the split at all markers. And you can see that our capture was split at each marker into individual segments. At this point, let's convert the media markers to timeline markers. And we can do that by going up the blue line and clicking on the marker track for the timeline. So I'll click there, and that marker moves. I'll click there, and that marker moves. And I'll click there, and that marker moves. We'll go back to Modify, and go back to Markers. And another option we have is to remove all markers. So let's do that. And they're all gone. Here I have a single Trek capture on the timeline. There are currently no markers in it. I'll also point out that on the left side here, the timeline is a control you can use to show or hide marker or quiz tracks. I'm going to click the down arrow, and now I've shown the marker track. I'll click the up arrow, and it's hidden. And if I want to put the playhead someplace like here, and I want to add a marker manually, I could go to the Modify, Markers, add a timeline marker. Note that the shortcut is also Shift-M. So we'll click this option. We've added a timeline marker, and I can convert that to a media marker by dropping down and clicking on the exposed marker track on that media along the blue line. So I'll click that, and that marker has moved down. Let's put the playhead here, and now I'm going to use the shortcut Shift-M to add a marker. Note that the suggested name at this point is marker 2. This sequences at the beginning of each project load, and if you look up here in properties, that name is displayed, and it's also currently highlighted, which means you can change it to whatever you want. So I'm just going to type whatever. And best thing to do is to tab out of that, and that puts the value down here. Once again, I'm going to move this down to the media by clicking here. The reason you do that is if it's a timeline marker and you move the media, well, the marker doesn't move. You go down here, now the marker moves with the media. Now, one thing that you can do with a timeline marker, I'll put him up here, is you can make a cut, Control X, and the marker moves with the cut. Control Z will undo that. Now, if you have a busy timeline, and let's Control D to close that selection. If you have a busy timeline and there are a lot of tracks, and you have the marker tracks exposed, and you're working with short tracks, height-wise, it's easy to accidentally add a marker when you're working on the clip. For instance, I might want to mean to grab here, but I grab here instead, and I get a marker. So I have to Control Z to undo that. So as a best practice, I always keep the marker track closed. And you can also use the shortcut Control M to open it, Control M to close it. If you keep the marker track closed, your markers show up as these little green, blue arrows, but no flags, and you can't click here to make one. So that works best for me. Another thing I'll pass on is if you start a new instance of Camtasia and a new project, by default, the marker or the quiz track will be closed. So you have to manually open it. Okay, I'm going to re-expose the markers, Control M. One other thing I'll point out is the way to navigate among markers. You can, of course, double click on one and go there. But there's also a shortcut, Control right bracket, that takes you to the next marker. Control left bracket takes you to the previous one. Control Shift right bracket makes that selection. And I'll double click the marker to go there. Or Control Shift left bracket will make that selection. Again, those are between markers. I'll collapse that with Control D. Now, if I should produce this, Control P, and I'll start through this wizard. If I'm doing a controller job and I go to video settings, I have an option, because I have markers in the project, to create multiple files from the markers, so that the production basically would be an MP4 from here to here, then one from here to here, then one from here to here. This is rarely used, but it's there if you want to use it. And I'll cancel this. One other thing I'll point out is if you have a project with a lot of markers, and I've had as many as 500 in a single project, it can be helpful if you co-locate a caption at the marker using the same name as on the marker. That way you can navigate quicker through a large, complicated project than you can by just hopping from marker to marker in a sequence. For example, I'll double-click to take me to marker 1, and since I clicked on it, its text is up here in the properties. I'm going to highlight it all, Control-C it, then back on the timeline, Shift-C adds a caption, and I'll stretch it out a little bit, and I'll double-click, and I'll use Control-V. Now I've got that marker text there. Back on the timeline, Control-right bracket, select the marker, grab the text, Control-C, back on the timeline, Shift-C, gives me a caption, and I can just go Control-V here, and I've now got myself 2 captions at my 2 markers. The benefit, of course, is that I can navigate quicker using the caption UI among all the different markers. I can go here, takes me to that guy, or go here, takes me to that guy. And if you have hundreds of these markers and hundreds of co-located captions, you can navigate much better using the captions. Now here I've been using the default marker names, and I've changed this one. If you want to work with long names, when you select a marker, you can enter a reasonable length name here. It'll actually be, you can enter one that's a little bit longer than this text box. However, if it's a really long name, you can't get it in here. And the only way to make a really long name in a marker is to start a production, and we'll do Control-P, enter, enter. We're using a controller, options. There's a table of contents, which comes from the markers. Next, next. And here are our markers. At this point, you can select a marker, and I'll change the whatever one. That's this guy here. And I'm going to use F2 to enter edit mode whenever I want to enter can be displayed in a TOC. So I can enter a pretty long marker name there and then tab out of that to save it. However, you have to produce the project to get that burned back into the flag. So let's go next. I'm going to call this test. And I'm just going to go ahead and produce. And while this is producing, I'm going to go ahead and stop this capture. I'll continue when it's done producing. All right, that production has finished. We'll open the production folder. And we'll launch it. Enter key. And I'll play this and see what happens. Uploaded that test capture in a new project. Stopped. And we have a TOC. It's currently closed. I'm going to open it. And here you can see my really long text has been produced just fine. I wanted to show you that. So we're going to close this. Control W. We'll go back to the project. Finish. And you can click on the marker now, and you can see that that long text now will display in the control. But you can't enter a long text here. You can just see what's already been done.